One of the most amazing things about software is you can learn how to build something that can reach people around the world. Whether it's only 5 people, all the way up to billions of people. It's pretty incredible that that's possible in this day and age. Now, in order for us to get to that scale, to actually reach those people and help those people, we need to start somewhere. And the way that you start is by building a web application. Now you might be wondering, what is a web application? Well, it's simple. It's a smart website. So that means that it remembers things. It has a database, it has some security, it has sessions so you can log in. It has all of those features that you might be very familiar with now, right? So if you use something like Instagram or Twitter, you're already familiar with this process. Those are built on top of web applications. So what we want to do is we want to take the basic concept of a web application and actually implement it in something real. And we're going to be doing that using Django. Django is a web application framework written in Python. Now, Python is a programming language that I would argue is very approachable for beginners. And I do recommend that you have some experience with Python prior to jumping in here. But Django, it is all in Python, and it takes a lot of those concepts that build up web applications, and it makes it really, really easy to build one with not that much time and also not that much of a in-depth understanding of everything that's going on. That is what attracted me to Django in the first place, right? I found it actually pretty simple to build a basic web application. And then from there, I started asking these questions like, how do I actually change what I store in the database? Right? Like, that's simple, but it's a good question. And once you start uncovering these questions, you will start to want to dive deeper into Django itself and also building web applications and all that. And I want to be here for that journey for you. So let me know if you have any questions. In this series, we're going to be taking you through Django step by step to make sure that you know how to launch your own web application, and you're going to do it in hopefully less time than you've ever thought possible. Again, let me know if you have any questions. My name is Justin. I'm going to be taking you through this series, and I want to make sure that you really understand Django, which is why I've been launching these courses for years. And I will say, if you find a different version of Django and a course with that different version, go ahead and stick with that version. This is meant to be an update to the latest version, but the idea here is you shouldn't be too worried about the version of Django. Instead, what you should be worried about is the Django itself, like actually learning what's inside of Django. That's also true with Python too. There are certainly changes that happen, and some of them are important, but for the most part, as you're learning, those changes don't really matter. Instead, you want to understand the concepts that build up web applications and how you actually do that with Django in a real, actual live environment. Let's go ahead and get started. Here's an overview of what we're going to be building. It is a modern blog application, so you can look at the blogs, the URLs change, our content changes, we have published times. But another thing that we have is the ability to simply edit things, edit the time they are going to be published, and also upload images. And all of this can be, in addition, managed in the Django admin. The Django admin is very powerful, and it's very useful for us to make changes too. Right? So there's a lot of things in here that aren't showing up on our main page. Another thing we can do is actually a search, something like working, and we get some results here. We see that search result, and even better, we monitor those lookups, right? We actually look for and save those queries. So this stuff might not seem all that complicated because it's not. Creating a blog is very straightforward to do. But to get here, it does take some time. So what we discuss is how to create views for CRUD. So we show you how to list everything out, how to show only published items, how to show all kinds of items if it's a user that's logged in. So yes, we talk about users and authenticating users.
We show you how to upload images and files and associate those to any given user. We also show you how to use regular forms in Django and model forms in Django. Both are very useful concepts to either just have some basic data come through or a lot of data, and data that you might want to store in the database and data that you might not. Really depends to you. We're also going to talk about URLs and URL routing. That means that how every piece of this blog is rendered out, right? So like here, this is a list. This has a bunch of items in them, right? That even shows us the draft items. That's pretty cool. And then we also have a way to look at the detail items. We can edit things and we can also delete things. Now, if you're not familiar, these concepts are the same regardless of what application you're building. If you think about it, let's say, for instance, you're building an e-commerce site. You have to list out all your products. You want to see a detail of that product. And then you, as the admin, might want to be able to edit or delete those products. Now, let's think about that on like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Same thing. You have a list of posts. You want to see a detail of a post. You can edit or delete those posts as well. So those concepts are discussed in detail, and it shows you in code as well using the function-based views. The reason we use this method is because it's an easy method to get introduced to. And it's an easy way to really understand how each one of these web pages works behind the scenes. And naturally, we're also going to talk about HTML templates and how these template variables work. So all of this stuff really just makes Django flourish as an amazing web application and to make amazing web applications on your own. So much of this is about conceptual as well as practical implementation of the Django project. Now, when we look at this project, it does look pretty simple, right? It's responsive and all that, and thanks to Bootstrap, but it doesn't seem like there's that much going on. And certainly there isn't that much going on, but it's definitely the foundation for everything else that you could build with Django. One more thing before we actually jump in is that we have all of our code open sourced. And that's all on github.com/coding for entrepreneurs. This open source code means that anytime in this series, you can jump into the code, look at what we actually did in the repo itself. So you can see, let's say, for instance, you needed to reference the blog model. You go into this blog models and you can see all of the code as it exists, at least at the very end, if not in every lecture itself. So this is really important to help you through this process because you might miss a comma somewhere. You might miss a parenthesis somewhere. And when that happens, it can be really frustrating. So I've open sourced all of the code to help alleviate a lot of that problem. Another thing is you can absolutely learn from some of these other projects, even if you don't go through the series themselves. Like if you look at the e-commerce project, you can actually kind of diagnose what's going on with it after you take this series and really just build your own e-commerce just with the knowledge that you have here. Now, of course, if you want more context and you want to know exactly how it's going on, just go ahead and check out that course altogether. But the idea here is that we have everything open sourced and we walk through this entire series with you step by step, and we make sure that you get it right the first time or after a few iterations. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, let's go ahead and jump in. So if you're on Mac or Linux, go ahead and open up your terminal window. And if you're on Windows, make sure you're using PowerShell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into my dev folder. Now I created this dev folder to store all of my code projects. And as you see, I already have a folder called try Django. So go ahead and do make dir try Django if you don't have that. We're going to cd into try Django. And now we're going to make our virtual environment. So pip env -- python 3.6 install Django equals to 2.2. You can absolutely use Python 3.7 or above, but certainly nothing below that. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And you're like, well, wait. I've never done any of these things before. If you haven't done this stuff, I'll tell you about some resources at the end of this video on exactly how you can go about getting to this point, right? But the main thing is we're starting a virtual environment and we're going to download Django. That stuff's not really that complicated, and I'm using pip env because it's very easy to do it cross-platform. That is Windows, Linux, and Mac. Now that we've got that, let's go ahead and do pip env shell. And inside of this shell, I already have some files listed out, but all you should see is pip file and pip file lock. I'm going to go ahead and make a directory called src, which is where I'm going to store my Django project. And we're going to do Django-admin start project. And this one is going to be called try Django. And then I'll just have that period at the end there to make it inside of this src folder. I hit enter, list everything out. Looks like it's actually correct. So let's go ahead and run the server. All right. I haven't done my migrations yet. I'll do that in a second. But let's go ahead and open up this in our browser. And there we go. We have Django 2.2 installed, started, and we're ready to start working. But one more setup process that I'm going to do is actually add this into a project into Sublime, into my text editor. Now notice I've already actually done it, but I'll go ahead and do it again just to show you guys how it's done. Okay? If you haven't done this 100 times already, then yeah, this will be review for a lot of you. Okay. So we navigate to our dev folder, where we just used that try Django project. We did the virtual environment. Open this up, and I'm going to save this project as, and of course it's the try Django project that I already have saved in there, but I'm going to go ahead and do it again. I'll replace what I have. You probably won't see that. There we go. We now have our project going, and I might as well run my migrations just to really solidify it. So python manage.py, migrate, and then we'll go ahead and do python manage.py, create super user. And I'm going to use CFE as my username, and then a whatever password because I'm working locally. Now, if you haven't seen any of what I just did before, that means that you really need to go and check out our GitHub repo. So this repo right here is where we have this README. This will give you the getting started guide because we've set up our system already. And this guide will actually show you how to set up your system and do everything that we just did. Now, this guide is made for beginners. So if everything that I just did was like so fast and over your head, then check out some of these other courses because they definitely introduce some concepts a lot slower than what I just did. Now, 30 Days of Python will give you a lot more of a foundation of Python. So you can actually build projects with Python, and then you are certainly going to want to know HTML and CSS. So checking out the Getting Started with HTML CSS project is a good idea. That's just generally a good idea. Now, you don't need to know HTML and CSS like the back of your hand to be successful in this series, or with Django even, but it's a really, really good idea to have at least some of the fundamental basics down. And then finally, we are going to be covering Bootstrap, so doing the Bootstrap basics and understanding how Bootstrap works is certainly recommended as well. Those things, if you haven't done them before, the reason I'm talking about them now is because I do think that they are important enough to really be successful with Django and also with this series. Now, even though the actual setup process felt very rapid fire like, I want to make sure that you know that's only to help guide the beginners. Like the absolute beginners that have never done that before probably shouldn't be doing this whole series from scratch, right? They should be getting more familiarity with some of the absolute basics. That's the reason for that. Now, going forward, we will be discussing all sorts of Django stuff in depth, and it's probably going to be more at this pace versus what I started with. Okay, so now that we have that project set up, let's go ahead and go back into it. So cd into my dev folder, into try Django. Now let's go ahead and activate our virtual environment, pipenv shell. Now I did mention it, but pipenv makes it easy for me to send this code to a Windows, Linux, or Mac user, and you could just run pipenv shell and also pipenv install, and then all of your requirements will be there. Your virtual environment will be created, and so on. Cool. So now we gotta ask the question: is like, what is Django for? Right. So if I cd into the src folder and run Django, so Python manage.py run server, I'm going to go ahead and grab that URL and let's go ahead and take a look at it. So in here, we have our Django project running. It is Django 2.2, pretty sweet, the newest version. And this is where we start to discuss what Django is for. Now, if we go into the admin, this is something that's built into Django, right? So Django has a way for your database and Django to talk to each other very easily. Now, if you've ever done like a one-click install to WordPress, this is in a way like the WordPress admin. It's not quite the same because that's just a whole different kind of system. But the idea here is that you can change database entries really easily using Django. So let's go ahead and log in. This is that super user password that I created. Now, if you don't remember what it is or you don't have one, you could go ahead and just create a brand new one. So Python manage.py, create super user, and do it that way. That super user has access to log in to the Django admin. Of course, we have to make sure our server is running or our development server is running to get in, and then we log in. So right out of the gates, Django has user authentication and authorization. It's built into Django. I mean, this saves a lot of development time in of itself, right? I just actually logged into Django. Now, I can test this by going into an incognito window, and it's going to make me log in again, right? So my session is no longer valid. Now, of course, all sorts of things I can do in here. I can look at these users, I can make changes to them, and those changes should stay regardless of if I'm logged in or not, right? So if I log out, actually, let's log out and also destroy the server or cancel out on the server with Control C. We can rerun the server. Now, Control C, it says it right there. That's usually how you cancel a lot of commands on the command line anyway. All right, so I've got the server running again and I log in again, and what do you know? It still has my user as well as that name that I set. So it has this persistent storage, and that storage is inside of this db.sqlite3 file. Right? So that's my actual database file right now. So hopefully this tells you a lot of what Django does out of the gates. It has authentication, which means it has security. It also stores the passwords in a secure manner. Like, it's not just the raw password like we have with our username and our first name. Those are just raw data, right? So it does that. It also maps to database technologies. So it easily maps to SQL. And that's called the Django ORM. I'm not going to get into that too much here, but the idea is that what you define in Django can be mapped into a database so we can access that database. Now, if you're not aware, databases have a syntax and language of their own. So there's something called SQL, that's SQL, queries that you can run on your database. Django does and handles all of that stuff for you. So those are some of the built-in things about it. The other thing is, as you notice, I'm changing the pages. Django's also handling that. It's handling what should be seen in any given page. In this case, it's using the Django admin, but what we're going to be building is not in the Django admin. I mean, we start here because it's built in, but we use a lot of the features that build up the Django admin to build our own web application, right? To have this sort of interaction with our actual users, because the Django admin is not going to have that. So another thing that's built into Django is something called views, and views handles how any of these pages are rendered. Now, what that means is it actually converts a bunch of data into an HTML document, and it shows that document at any given URL. If you're unclear of what I'm talking about, no worries there. We're going to absolutely go over every step of all of that to make it our own, right? But I just wanted to give you an idea of what it is that Django does and why we use Django versus something like WordPress. You use Django because you have complete control over every piece of this. WordPress, you probably could change all those things, but it's not made that way. WordPress is made to work out of the box for blogs. Django can make a blog, it can do all sorts of things, and it could also make a web application like Instagram. I mean, Instagram used it. I think they still use it, but it's their main backend, right? That's pretty cool to know. So Django has a lot of power built into it by default, and those are the things we're going to go over.